Hey friends, welcome back to Pages and Grace. My name is Jess. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I want to sit down and talk about my favorite books from 2026. Alright, this is one of my favorite videos to record every year. It is my favorite books. Only the books that I absolutely loved from this past year. Now, as I was thinking back, without looking through my list of books that I had read, I really didn't have a standout favorite for the year. I read a lot of different types of books, and it just didn't, I didn't have a standout fiction book that just blew everything else away. I had a lot of really good books, but nothing that was like, this is my absolute favorite book of the year. Not like last year where I had two books in contention, and I would say I equally recommend both of them. This year I have a lot of good books, but it's not the same level as the books that I read last year. I had a very solid 4-star reading year last year. Alright, so I have 8 fiction books to talk about and 2 nonfiction books. I am not going to compare the fiction and nonfiction books as to what's my favorite. I love both. They serve a very different purpose, and so I'm going to just separate those two. The first 7 of the fiction are in any order. I enjoyed all of them. I think I've picked a favorite. It's one that I read at the very beginning of the year. Just like last year, the beginning of the year is where I tend to find my favorite books of the year. And so it's hard to compare the books I read at the end of the year to the beginning of the year. Maybe it's just my mindset. I'm less busy in January and February, and I am able to really immerse myself in the books a little bit better. I don't know, but my favorite book is from, I think, January, maybe February of last year. Okay, so let's get started. The first book I want to talk about is Where the Trees Touch the Sky by Karen Barnett. It is a Redwood National Park novel. This is a historical fiction, dual timeline about the beginnings of the Redwood National Park. This book, this was the first book I had read by this author, and I really, really enjoyed it, which was refreshing to read about people who are going through lots of struggles and who make some really, really dumb choices sometimes. This book I really enjoyed. I did go back and read one of her previous books, and it was not to the same level as this book. So I think for this author, I'll be looking at her future works and see what I think, but I did absolutely enjoy my time with this one and definitely recommend. All right, the next book was the Middle Grade March group read, and that was The Secret Garden. I had never read this book before. I had watched a movie adaptation of it, and I really enjoyed it as a kid. This just took me back, all the nostalgia of watching that movie over and over. Such a sweet story. Of course, gardening, you all know. Anything with gardening is going to have a little bit of a special place in my heart, especially when it's so well done. I loved seeing the garden come alive through the eyes of children. It makes it just magical and miraculous, and I hope that we can all hold on to a little bit of that wonder even in adulthood. All right, the next book I don't own physically, and that is The Lost Boys of Barlow Theater by Jamie Jo Wright. I have enjoyed all of the books that Jamie Jo Wright has put out. I think they're all 4 or 5 star. She does a fantastic job with having it be eerie and creepy without crossing the line into paranormal. And there's always this tie back to Christian faith and values. And it is, I just really enjoy her writing. I will pick up all of her books at this point. She is an author I want to read to zero. I didn't put her on my list for this year because I know there are several on her backlist, and I have some already ambitious goals for this year. So she is one that I want to read to zero at some point, but I'm just slowly savoring her books along the way. This book specifically, I really enjoyed the view from the adoptee. So the main character was adopted when she was a child, and she kind of processes through her thoughts and how that affects her as she is growing up. I thought it was beautifully done, and as an adoptive mother, I absolutely love books that show that perspective. Highly recommend Jamie Jo Wright, all of her books, but this was my favorite of hers that I read this year. Next is a book that I've raved about many times already on this channel, and that is Counted with the Stars by Connelly Cassette. This is the first book in the Out from Egypt series. I thoroughly enjoyed this series. It's biblical fiction set in the story of the Exodus. It is very well done. It follows a fictional character who is set in biblical times, which I absolutely love. I love experiencing biblical times through the eyes of just your average everyday person. This book was so well done. The whole series, I just loved it. And I've heard that there might be a second trilogy that would follow along after the events in these books. But I highly recommend these if you haven't checked them out already. What am I saying? I recommend everything on this list. It's my top books of the year. Of course, I think they're fantastic and you should pick them up. All right, the next book is one that I actually read in December at the very end of the year. It wasn't on my list to pick up. I actually picked up the novella, which is a Christmas book. It was in the Christmas season. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to pick it up and read it. And I got a few chapters in and realized just how much of the story I was missing. The main novel needed to be read before it. And this main novel was All My Secrets by Lynn Austen. I really enjoyed another Lynn Austen that I read earlier in the year. She is an author that I am toying with the idea of going back and reading all of her backlist. But this one specifically, I thoroughly enjoyed. I loved the family dynamics. It was 3 generations of women. We follow 3 generations of women finding their place after losing one her husband, one lost her son, and then the other lost her father. This story follows these women as they have to come together in ways that they may not have before to really decide what their life's going to look like going forward. This was one of those books I didn't want to end. And thankfully it didn't, because there was a Christmas novella that I read right after it and recommend that one as well. But definitely go back and read All My Secrets first. Highly recommend this one. I gave it 5 stars. All right, the next book was a buddy read with Jeanette from Jane Reads, and that was Between the Sound and Sea by Amanda Cox. I absolutely loved this story. I've loved everything from Amanda Cox. She is an author I'm going to read to zero this year. Before I get into what the book's about, I want to say that the way that Amanda Cox writes just jives with my brain. There's a lot of books that I read that I struggle to focus in long spans of time. Like I read a little bit here and a little bit there. If you follow me on Goodreads, you might notice that I have 5 to 7 books going at once. And that's a lot of it. I pick it up, it doesn't hold my attention. I don't know, it's really hard for books to hold my attention for long spans of time. I've always struggled with focus since I was little. I'm sure smartphones do not help. But the way that her books are written, my brain can just keep going and going, and I don't want to put them down. So I don't know if everyone has that experience, but the way that she writes is just fantastic, in my opinion. This book we follow... So in this one we follow Joey, who becomes a project manager on the renovations of this lighthouse. She is working for this elderly man and his grandson who is kind of helping him, making sure things are going well on the project. It is a beautiful story of faith and friendship, and I love the grandfather in this book. He is such a meddling little matchmaker, and I'm here for it every day. And this is only my second Amanda Cox, but I've given them both 5 stars so far. I really enjoyed this book. I would definitely recommend it. I also really enjoyed the buddy read of this. I think any book reading with a friend just makes it that much better. So definitely recommend this. I want to read all of Amanda Cox's books. I have several on her backlist to go back and find. All right, the next book on this list, I think this is the 7th book I've talked about. So the next one will be my absolute favorite. This one, this book was a very, very close second. So maybe the last 2 are in order. But this was my first book by this author. She has the 2nd book in this series coming out, I believe, this fall. I think she has 2 books coming out within 2 months this fall. So be looking forward to that. But it is Love in the Eternal City by Rebecca W. Martin. And this one we follow Elena, who is working in Rome, and she is semi-new to the city. She did a semester abroad in Rome when she was in college. There are lots of moving pieces in this. There is romance. There is the development of friendship. There are so many moving parts in this book that I really enjoyed. I loved the romance. I loved the friendships that develop. I think her friend is the one who gets the next book, which I'm excited to read about. I love the depiction of the Catholic faith in this book. It was so beautiful and well done, and one that I am going to try to reread before the 2nd book comes out this fall. All right, the last book and my favorite fiction book for the year would be The Letter Tree by Rachel Fordham. This book was just so much fun. It was sweet. It was romantic. There were letters being passed back and forth, which always ups my rating of a book. If there's letters or secret communication back and forth, and this book had both. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's one that I will probably reread. But I have a more in-depth review. I will link that video for you if you want more information on my thoughts on this book. I read a lot of nonfiction this year, which is normal for me, but this was like a whole other level of nonfiction reading for me. I know in my goals video, I kind of talked about an update about our family and kind of the process we've been going through this year. And part of that process was reading a lot of theological books, which in the process has enriched our conversations and our faith tremendously. Two of the most impactful books of this year would have to be, I don't know. They each have an impact in their own way. So I'm just going to talk about them, and there's no order. I'm not picking a favorite. So the first one is Rome Sweet Home by Scott and Kimberly Hahn. This is their story they wrote together. Each chapter has a perspective from Scott and a perspective from Kimberly. It was such a beautiful story to see as my husband and I were living through the process of being from different faith backgrounds and really diving into that and realizing what a difference it makes in our family and why it is important to dig into it and have those hard conversations, even when sometimes it's a really big struggle. I was in tears several times, especially from Kimberly's perspective. I understood Scott's perspective more, but the feelings in Kimberly's perspective were spot on for the struggles we went through this year. And it's a beautiful story. I absolutely loved it. I love how they go through individually and talk about their own faith journey, where they came from, what the journey was like, and eventually their journey to the Catholic Church. It was such a beautiful story, and it was heavily biblically based, and it taught me a lot, and I really appreciated it, and it's one that I want to reread. And the last book I'm going to talk about is, actually it has a foreword from Scott Hahn in this book, and that is Jesus and the Jewish Roots of the Eucharist by Brent Petrie. Petrie. I heard him talking on a podcast recently. It's Petrie. This book comes from a Jewish background, looking at Jewish traditions in the Bible and the text and all of the texts that are fulfilled in the Last Supper. It was such a deep dive, but told in an approachable way. I don't know. This was my favorite book of the year. What am I saying? I absolutely loved this book. I went ahead and read Jesus and the Jewish Roots of Mary, which was absolutely fantastic as well. This one, I don't know. It was so much. I think this is a book, if you are not Catholic, you will still get a lot out of this book. If you have been Catholic your whole life, you will still get a lot out of this book. It was so well done. And there was a point, I can't remember what chapter it was. It was in chapter 6, where we talked about the fourth cup and the death of Jesus. And that chapter, I remember I was out in the garden, I was pulling weeds, listening to this on audiobook, and I just stopped in my tracks. I don't know, there were connections being made that I had never thought of before. It was so well done. And the awe and reverence for the Eucharist and why it is such a big deal. I loved how this book, it's the Jewish root, so it comes from Jewish tradition, and it comes from the Old Testament texts that point towards the amazing gift that the Eucharist is for us and how important the Eucharist is. 5-star read. Okay, I'm going to say it. It was my favorite book of the year. I highly recommend it. Please check it out if you haven't already. If you've ever had curiosity about the Eucharist and why Catholics take it so seriously, this book will tell you everything you need to know. So, highly recommend. All right, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate each and every one of you who take the time out of your busy day to spend some time talking about books with me. If you've made it this far in the video, leave me like the stack of books emoji, because I know we are all surrounded with stacks of books that we need to get to. I have such an ambitious reading list for 2026, and I'm very excited to get to these books and to tell you all about them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.